All right, hello everyone, welcome back. We're gonna start up another piece here. And my name is Brona and I'm gonna be narrating this second piece for you guys for Cat. And Chris is just gonna be helping out. This one has a bunch of different colors on it, and G and Chris over here are preparing that bubble that Cat's going to pick this piece up on. All right, she's just using a fluffy torch. Again, this one runs only on propane to give a nice heat to that pickup. And we're just doing a bunch of quick flashes again and again to be able to have this hot enough. And they just dropped a little bit of color on this bubble. So the last one was all clear, but he just heated up a little solid bar of color. Evening red in German. The name is German, so I'm not gonna try to butcher that, but yeah, you can even see it now. And also another thing about colored glass is that it will be a different color when it is done through the annealing process. So right now isn't really a true statement of the color it's gonna be. Actually, some red colors don't look very pretty when they're hot. So they're just checking on these pie dividers here. So you'll see that there's like a longer rectangle, and then there's the circle, which will be the top of the bubble. If you think about it like a long vase, that longer portion is going to be the sidewalls, and then that bottom piece is going to be the bottom, but it will all become one large bubble, and it'll look more cohesive that way. And she's just using some compressed air to cool down that metal fork. You can see, it's hard to see the underneath of it, but it gets kind of red hot, and so we don't want it to start to warp with all this heating and cooling. We also want to keep on opening and closing these doors. We don't want the reheating chamber to have to work too hard to keep everything thoroughly heated. If we left those doors open, it would be losing a lot of heat. And we want this glass to be warm enough again to pick up. So she's just hitting them almost a little bit to know that they still move. So that's a ceramic plate that's been covered in kiln wash. And we just want to make sure that the glass isn't sticking to the plate, or else we won't be able to get it off at all. If we heat it too hot, it will fuse to that plate. And if you're watching G. Brian over here, he just gathered another layer of glass. How many layers of glass do you think you're going to get? Just one more and then we're ready. But this is already a lot of glass. So there's a very, very small bubble inside of there. He's almost done zero inflation since doing that drop of color on there. So it's mostly clear, so you'll really see how long that color bar will go and how much color will actually produce. Also just checking the length to make sure that it's long enough as well. And he's just doing some shaping and centering over here, actually using a pad of newspaper that's been soaked in water. This is a very commonly used tool in the glass making. It's one of the closest things that we can get to touching the glass with our hands. So Kat's going to do the final gather, and she's actually going to do what's called a strip gather. So she'll be taking away some of that unwanted material so she doesn't have too much glass. So you'll see just a bunch of glass drip off into that bucket right there. Or not, maybe not. Or she will, yeah. So she just made sure that it was the right size and then took off on an unnecessary glass. So she almost has the size that she needs. She's just going to make sure everything is a consistent heat throughout. So that last layer that we added is a lot hotter than the core, since we had to cool down that core a little bit before being able to gather this much glass. Now the glass at this temperature, 2100 degrees Fahrenheit, is like the consistency of honey, so it's hard to gather up that much material and mass all at once. So that's why we do it in a bunch of layers like this. Just doing a check and a couple rolls on the marver to make sure it's just the right size. just final heat to make sure everything is warm enough. We want it to have a little bit of a glow so that it tacks together. Now she's just putting that compressed air boot on in case she needs to inflate. She's just rolling up all those little pieces of Murrini right now. And now she's just inflating her bubble a little bit to match the size of the Murrini. Slowly just pressing it down. And now you're just taking tweezers and compressing everything, and then they'll actually sweep away any of that kiln wash that was left behind. So that kiln wash will come off now, but if it gets too hot, it will just fuse to the surface and leave an undesirable texture. And they're just going to use some tweezers to connect everything together and push it all down. And you'll notice that we never stop rotating our glass. This is to keep everything on center. So you're seeing right now what happens when we stop rotating and when we have to do these specific points, the glass is just immediately falling off center. So she's just also rolling the sidewalls of this form on the metal table right here. It's called a marver. So just more inflation and pushing it up against the marver. This is just trying to force that bubble to come past the Murrini that she picked up. So when she started off with that roll up, the bubble wasn't really long enough. So that's what the move is when she's rolling and inflating. She's trying to force that bubble to be long enough to do this next pickup. All right, so it looks like there has been a change in plans. So we kind of have to roll on the fly here. If the glass doesn't go according to plan, we have a general idea of what we're going to do, but if we have to change it along the way, we do that. So she's no longer able to put that cap on like she did the last one, so she's going to do something different to it. It's not the right diameter. It would cover up a weird amount of glass, so she's going to put it somewhere else instead. I'm not quite sure yet, but we will figure it out. So it's going back in the kiln for now. The cap was supposed to be at this point, but I think she's going to do a little bit more inflation and shaping before she attaches it to a different part of it, so that it'll be more of a tactile piece. And all of her pieces that involve Murrini are a little bit tactile because they don't fully fuse together, and that's kind of the point of using this type of medium. So when we start with just a bunch of little discs like this, you have to do a lot of working and a lot of shaping to get everything to not have a bunch of texture on it, to get it hot enough to mash together. And sometimes you can lose a little bit of the form or warp your pattern altogether. So she just got it really, really hot and is going to start to do the shaping. So you can see that more at this point, the Murrini has basically become one with the bubble. And while she's doing all the heating, you can see that Chris and G are kind of switching up the bench so she has whatever she needs right in front of her to begin the shaping. So she's just creating a little constriction at the top portion of that bubble where there's no texture to be able to cut that off, as we don't really need that anymore. And the tools that she's using right now are jacks. Jacks are the most often used tool in the glass studio. And they are actually coated in beeswax. So anytime you see flames or steam come up, that's what's happening. She's trimming it away with the diamond shears, and the glass at this temperature is pretty easy to cut through. So now it's completely textured in that Murrini, and you can't really see the color on the inside. She's just shaping it now with a pad of newspaper again. So she's just pulling a little bit better of a termination right now is what it's called. So the termination is whatever's left behind when you remove some glass. We want it to be as clean and on center as possible. And so she's just creating a little bit of stress and then snapping that off with the same tool. Okay, so since it did go according to plan, she has come up with a plan for after it is all cold through the annealing cycle and off the pipe. So she's going to potato it and add some texture through cold working processes. So we can cold work glass, and that's a pretty common way of working glass as well. You might have seen a lot of it with crystal work. So the carving into it is a cold working process. So we use diamond encrusted different tools and bits. So she might potato it with a large lathe that has wheels that are encrusted with diamonds to get that carved line in there. And when you see carved glass like that, most oftenly it is crystal. And the difference between crystal and what we're melting here is lead. So it's lead crystal that they're talking about. And that lead makes it easier for them to carve into it. But it's not really necessary for us here, and so we don't use it, and that's why we use soda lime glass when melting in the furnace. So she's starting to inflate it further to try to get the final form at this point. All right, so you can see that it's almost glowing like a bright orange color right now. It has a good amount of heat, and you can even see the heat starting to rise on the pipe as it begins to shift in color. And that's what I was talking about earlier when I said that we needed to cool it down with a pipe warmer. So the more heats you take, the further up that heat travels. And just a team of people. So Chris is shielding her with a cherry wood paddle right now, just to make sure that she doesn't heat up too much. Now with a piece this size, it does radiate its own heat, and that's why she's also wearing a sleeve that's also made of Kevlar. And we want there to be a nice gradual slope to that jack line rather than a harsh one, or else that would be pretty hard to break off and could risk it cracking. So she's just pulled in that pad of newspaper to try to cool down that tip. We don't want it to blow out too thin, or else that could be a breaking point. So he's just taking a quick couple of what we call flashes to bring the whole body of this piece up to a higher heat as well. It doesn't really need to be super movable, but it should be above 1,000 degrees. 1,000 degrees is cold for us here in the glass studio, so we want to make sure the entire piece is above that temperature at all times. So she's just given a little extra heat to the back, but we are reaching towards the end of making of this piece, and it's pretty large right now. All right, so this is going to be the last flash. I just heard her say it. So this is going to be where they crack off the piece. And Kat's just going to use a scoring tool to make sure that jack line cracks where she wants it to. So a little bit of water and a metal tool, and she just runs it completely around the form. And then she'll use her tweezers as well to add specific drops of water, and then she'll just tap it free. And then we'll do what's called a fire polish to make sure that there's no sharp edges on that jack line right there. So Chris is just getting ready to make sure that he can grab it, and then tap, and that's free. Can we get a round of applause? Yeah! All right, and a quick little fire polish, and into the kiln it goes to be seen tomorrow. All right, let's hear it one more time for Kat Burns and the wonderful assistants.